One of the challenges that folks like Helen have come up against and other pastoral caregivers is the bias that professional caregivers, therapists, psychiatrists, even pastoral counselors have. That there are boundaries that need to be installed when one is going to be in a caregiving position. And the fear has been, do not let people who are just good, kindly church folks go out and do this because they don't have any boundaries. They will have their own agenda. They will try to save people. They will try to heal people. They will try to convert people. And when there are spiritual issues, religious issues around, we need to have real professionals doing this because it is such a delicate business. I'm going to come around at the end and say some more about that, but that is the cultural context where pastoral or spiritual caregivers are when it comes to wanting to serve folks in the kind of way that the Community of Hope does it. And so our training and our perspective is very important, not because we need to get psychiatrists' approval, but that we need to do our jobs well because we are there to be in service to others. As I thought about what I could say today, and I'm going to give you some of the usual stuff that y'all already know. But the image of the boundaries which there are in physical and spiritual life occurred to me. I didn't make handouts, but I've got made 2 copies of these pictures, and y'all can just pass these back. I do want them back for class 2. There are all kinds of boundaries and layers of life. Y'all are familiar with auras around our physical bodies. You are familiar with, if you've seen the picture of Earth, high up you see the layers of the atmosphere. There are all kinds of boundaries also in life. And the image that came to me when I was thinking about doing this with y'all is the reality of the cell. You've got the living cell, and around this cell is a membrane. No membrane, no cell. It is what keeps that organism alive and functioning. And it's got all kinds of stuff. Maybe some of y'all know biology, and they're just all these kinds of things. I remember in my high school biology, the mitochondria, for some reason, was the one that struck me as very interesting. So this membrane around the cell has certain basic functions. It anchors the cell in place, and it gives shape to the cell. It is responsible for attaching the cell to the extracellular environment. Most cells go into tissues, and as they group together. Another important cell membrane function is the transportation of materials needed for the function of the cell organelles. Around the cell, besides other cells, are these fluids or enzymes or food or whatever, which need to be able to get into the cell so that the cell can survive. And so this has got to be a permeable membrane. It's not a hard cell like you would find in a plant. The movement of substances may either be at the expense of energy or passive. There is this transfer. There is this, I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. You know, you read this great paragraph in a book, and you say, well, I got to remember that, and you don't. I believe it's Lipton in his book, talked about that every cell in the body knows what every other cell in the body is feeling. That our whole system is an interconnected system. And so through the use of enzymes or other kinds of information being passed along, cells in the feet know what cells in the fingers or in the liver or the lungs are feeling. This idea that we all grew up with, that everything is compartmentalized, all these boundaries are fixed and stable and impermeable, nobody believes that anymore. That there is this constant flow of energy and information, and that we are, as everyone likes to say these days, we are all connected. The protein molecules in the cell membrane receive signals from other cells or the outside environment and convert the signals to messages that are passed to the organelles inside the cell. In some cells, the protein molecules in the cell membrane group together to form enzymes which carry out metabolic reactions near the inner surface of the cell membrane. And finally, the proteins in the cell membrane also help very small molecules to get themselves transported through the cell membrane, provided the molecules are traveling from a region with lots of molecules in the area to be able to move this through. So in summary, the membrane gives structure to the cell, connects cells together, is semi-permeable, allowing for the transfer of chemicals to and from the cell. I would like to shift this around now and think about not the transfer of chemicals, but the transfer of information. And so I'd like for you to think about what you do in your caring ministries as a meeting of boundaries and the transfer of information and caring. If you are a membrane here and you're, for lack of a better word, your care receiver is here, you each have this membrane, and your caring is based upon the ability for these two organisms to be able to share information. Emotional, intellectual, narrative, historical, psychological, whatever. But somehow there's got to be this bridge between you and your care receiver. And you've got to have boundaries in order for this to actually work. You need to know that they have a membrane, boundaries. You have boundaries. And the glory of this is how does this information and our love for others transfer from one to another. Here are some ways which occurs to me, and we'll talk where we're headed here in the next part is this thing on empathy, which is the way in which this information is transmitted. But there is the establishment of this intersubjective field between us. You receive information from the one you're caring for. You process the information within yourself. You experience, or there's the experience of understanding. And you relate that understanding to your care receiver. And the care receiver experiences being understood and cared for. This is what happens when you Community of Hope folks are in connection across the membrane between yourself and another. And the enzyme which you're using, as it were, is going to be empathy. This information comes in, and you process it. And as they experience your understanding of them, then they are helped in their spiritual journey. This is why it is so important that we understand this dynamic flow and how we can get messed up big time when these membranes become too porous on either party. The risks are that the boundary of the care receiver are too porous, and they threaten to overwhelm you. You have been with folks who are so needy. They are like a vacuum cleaner, and they need so much. They're just pulling this constantly out of you because they have these huge gaps in their membrane, and they're trying to get food inside here, and they're sucking it all from you. You know what that's like, and you know how exhausted you feel when you've been with someone like that, and why they are an especially challenging relationship, because you cannot satisfy the need. And that hurts our feelings, because we're supposed to be able to provide whatever anyone needs so that they can do better. But when you're trying to care for someone who is a bottomless pit, you will be just another one who's emptied themselves out. And the person then goes on to someone else who will try to care for them. Or the boundaries of the caregiver are too porous, with your interior experience becoming too active. We'll talk about this in more detail, but the risk here is that you start seeing yourself too much in that person, because they have triggered your own inner life too much. And then you start trying to deal with them as though they were you, and you were trying to solve your own problem by helping them solve the same problem. The membrane is too porous, and you're not able to see them as they are, mainly a different cell. They aren't you, but you're flowing into them too much. And if there is anything which the professionals are nervous about, is that folks who are untutored in this will begin to pour themselves out too much into their care receivers, and will break the boundaries of allowing the other person to be who they are and to become who they can be. That's why it's so important for us to know what we are doing when we are blessed with the opportunity to share a walk with the journey of someone else. Because at stake here is the basic living values and living energy of both people. And when you're messing around with this stuff, it is very, very powerful. And that's why you don't try this at home. This is for professionals only. For folks like us, it is important for us to know the dynamics and to be able to recognize the signals when we're getting too close. When we're getting too close to them, even if we never say it, we can feel it. Or we know that they are needing us too much. That's a warning signal. Now, when things go in a healthy way, the boundary of the care receiver is strengthened. They are, in a sense, the one we're caring for them, and because of the quality of care that we are giving, their boundary becomes stronger, which means that they're able to exist in a more powerful way for themselves, that they don't need us anymore. The whole goal of any kind of treatment, therapy, whatever, is termination. That's where we're headed. And so whatever accomplishes that internal strengthening for them, which will allow them to, in a happy way, say, thanks for the help, goodbye. That means that we have done our job. Now, if we get depressed because they don't need us anymore, well, then that's a different thing. The other healthy thing is the boundary of the caregiver, us, is secure and still receptive. Thinking of us here. This is our nucleus and all our little organelles. We cannot seriously attempt to help anyone unless our membrane, our boundary of who we are is secure. That we know ourselves, that we are solid within ourselves, that we are not subject to the ebbs and flows of someone else's feelings in this kind of relationship, and that we feel whole and strong within ourselves. If we are another needy person going to other folks thinking that if we can help others that'll make us feel good about ourselves, we need to do some more growing first before we are strong enough, our boundaries, our membranes are secure enough to allow us to be able to have this flow.
Yeah.